What if everything you thought you knew about America's past was only half the story? For most people, the history of the United States begins with a declaration in 1776, a handful of revolutionaries, and a dream of freedom. But beneath the surface, there's a web of secrets, controversies, and untold stories that have shaped the nation in ways few ever realize. From ancient civilizations lost to time to shadowy deals and hidden motives behind the country's biggest turning points, the real story of America is far more mysterious and far more dramatic than the textbooks ever let on. Imagine a land where people thrived thousands of years before Columbus ever set sail, where entire cultures rose and vanished, leaving behind only cryptic mounds and legends. Picture a revolution that wasn't just about liberty, but about power, profit, and secret alliances. Even today, debates rage about what really happened in the nation's most pivotal moments. Who pulled the strings? Who got left behind? And what truths were quietly buried along the way? As we peel back the layers of America's past, you'll discover the controversies that still spark heated arguments, the rumors that refuse to die, and the mysteries that historians are still racing to solve. This isn't just a story of presidents and battles. It's a journey into the unknown, where every answer leads to more questions. So, are you ready to see the United States in a way you've never seen before? Because once you start looking closer, you might never see it the same way again. And the real surprises are just getting started. Long before the first European ships appeared on the horizon, the American continent was already home to people whose origins remain shrouded in mystery. For decades, the most accepted theory claimed that the first Americans crossed a vast, icy land bridge called Beringia, connecting Siberia to Alaska during the last ice age. According to this story, small bands of hunters followed herds of mammoths and bison, braving brutal conditions to reach a new world. But what if that's not the whole truth? Recent discoveries have thrown this old narrative into question, sparking fierce debates among scientists and rewriting what we thought we knew. Some researchers now point to ancient tools and bones found deep in South America, artifacts that seem to predate the Beringia migration by thousands of years. Could it be that people arrived by sea, navigating treacherous coastlines in simple boats, long before the ice melted? DNA evidence has only deepened the mystery, revealing genetic links between Native Americans and distant populations in Asia, and even hints of connections to ancient peoples from the Pacific. Theories swirl about lost migrations, forgotten explorers, and civilizations that vanished without a trace. And while textbooks often gloss over these questions, the truth is that the story of America's first inhabitants is still unfolding. Every new discovery, whether it's a buried village, a mysterious skeleton, or a strand of ancient DNA, challenges what we thought we knew and suggests that the real origins of America's first people might be far more complex and far more surprising than anyone ever imagined. But if the land's first settlers left behind more questions than answers, what about the civilizations that rose in their wake? The next chapter reveals cultures whose achievements and sudden disappearances still baffle experts to this day. Before the first European ever set foot on American soil, the continent was alive with civilizations whose stories have been largely erased from popular memory. These weren't just scattered tribes living in isolation. Across the land, complex societies flourished, building cities, trading networks, and monuments that still defy explanation. The Mississippian culture, for example, constructed sprawling urban centers like Cahokia, a city that once rivaled the size of London. Its massive earthen mounds, some as tall as a 10-story building, still rise from the ground today, silent witnesses to a forgotten era. Yet, despite their achievements, the Mississippians vanished mysteriously, leaving behind only ruins and unanswered questions, and they weren't alone. The ancient Puebloans carved entire cities into the cliffs of the Southwest, engineering multi-story dwellings that have stood for centuries. Their intricate road systems and ceremonial kivas hint at a society with deep spiritual beliefs and advanced knowledge of astronomy. But by the time Spanish explorers arrived, these cities were abandoned, their people scattered. What drove them to leave? Was it drought, conflict, or something even more mysterious? Theories abound, but the truth remains elusive. Other cultures, like the Adena and Hopewell, left behind elaborate burial mounds filled with artifacts that suggest far-reaching trade and sophisticated social structures. Yet their names rarely appear in history books, overshadowed by the later arrival of Europeans. Even today, new discoveries are rewriting the story. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of vast trade routes, lost languages, and technologies that challenge old assumptions about what Native American societies were capable of. It's a past filled with enigmas, civilizations that rose, thrived, and then disappeared, leaving only traces for us to piece together. And as researchers continue to dig, both literally and figuratively, the picture of pre-Columbian America grows ever more complex. But if these ancient cultures could build empires and then vanish almost without a trace, what happened when outsiders arrived with their own ambitions and agendas? The next chapter uncovers the collision of worlds that would change the continent forever. When most people picture the colonization of America, they imagine a handful of English settlers landing at Plymouth Rock, braving harsh winters and sharing a peaceful meal with local tribes. But the real story is far more complicated and far more unsettling. Long before the Pilgrims, waves of explorers, conquerors, and fortune-seekers from Spain, France, and even Russia were carving up the continent, each with their own ambitions and methods. The Spanish, for example, swept through the south and west, establishing missions and presidios, but also leaving a trail of conflict, forced conversions, and entire communities devastated by new diseases. In the east, the French built trading empires along the rivers, forging alliances with some tribes while clashing violently with others. And then there's the story of Hawaii, a part of the United States that's often treated as an afterthought in history classes. For centuries, the Hawaiian Islands developed in isolation, with their own kings, culture, and traditions. But by the late 18th century, European ships began to arrive, bringing not just trade, but also political intrigue and deadly epidemics. Rumors still swirl about secret deals and betrayals that led to the island's eventual annexation, a process that left many native Hawaiians feeling robbed of their sovereignty and identity. Back on the mainland, the English colonies were anything but united. Each had its own government, economy, and relationship with the land's original inhabitants. Some colonists relied on uneasy alliances with local tribes, while others resorted to outright warfare or manipulation to seize territory. The Dutch and Swedes, though often overlooked, also left their mark, establishing settlements that would later be absorbed by the growing English presence. Behind the scenes, colonial leaders struck secret bargains, traded land for weapons, and sometimes even played rival tribes against each other to gain the upper hand. The reality of colonization was a tangled web of ambition, survival, and betrayal. It was a time when fortunes could be made or lost overnight, and when the fate of entire peoples could hinge on a single, often ruthless, decision. And as the colonies grew, so did the tensions between settlers and natives, between rival European powers, and even among the colonists themselves. But as these conflicts simmered, a new question began to emerge. What would happen when the colonies themselves started to challenge the very empires that created them? The next chapter reveals how the seeds of revolution were sown in the chaos of colonial ambition. As the colonies grew richer and more crowded, the air crackled with tension. The British Crown, eager to refill its coffers after costly wars in Europe and America, began to squeeze its distant subjects with new taxes and tighter controls. But beneath the surface, the push for independence was about more than just taxes on tea or stamps. Whispers of secret meetings, backroom deals, and foreign intrigue swirled through the streets of Boston and Philadelphia. Some historians even suggest that powerful merchants and landowners saw revolution as a way to protect their own fortunes and ambitions, using the language of liberty to rally the masses while quietly negotiating with foreign powers behind closed doors. The American Revolution wasn't a simple story of good versus evil. It was a chaotic struggle where neighbors turned against each other and where the line between patriot and traitor could shift overnight. While the famous battles at Lexington, Concord, and Saratoga are etched into legend, less is said about the spies, double agents, and secret alliances that tipped the balance. France, eager to weaken its old rival Britain, funneled money, weapons, and troops to the rebels, sometimes in exchange for promises that would shape the new nation's future. Rumors persist that even Spain and the Netherlands played shadowy roles, hoping to carve out their own influence in the aftermath. When independence was finally won, the real scramble began. The new United States was broke, divided, and surrounded by powerful enemies. Yet in a move that still sparks debate, President Thomas Jefferson struck a deal with France in 1803 that would double the nation's size overnight. The Louisiana Purchase is often hailed as a masterstroke, but some speculate that France, desperate for cash and facing its own crises, may have pressured the Americans into a deal that was as much about European politics as American destiny. Was it really a bargain, or were there hidden strings attached? As the nation pushed westward, the price of expansion became clear. Treaties were signed and broken, native lands were seized, and new states were carved out in a relentless drive for growth. The dream of independence had come true, but it carried a heavy cost, one paid not just in gold and land, but in lives and promises broken. And as the United States grew, so did the divisions within, setting the stage for a conflict that would threaten to tear the country apart. The next chapter dives into the storm of civil war, where the fight for the nation's soul would reach its breaking point. By the mid-1800s, the United States was a nation divided not just by geography, but by deep, festering wounds that had never truly healed. The story most people hear is simple. The North wanted to end slavery, the South wanted to keep it, and war was inevitable. But the reality is tangled in layers of politics, economics, and personal ambition. Some historians argue that the fight was as much about power and control as it was about morality. Southern leaders, fearing the loss of their economic dominance, saw the growing influence of the North as a direct threat to their way of life. Meanwhile, Northern politicians debated not just the fate of slavery, but how to keep the fragile Union from splintering apart. Rumors and conspiracy theories swirled even then. Some whispered that secret societies and foreign agents were stoking the flames of division, hoping to weaken the young nation from within. Others claimed that powerful industrialists in the North saw war as a way to reshape the economy in their favor, while Southern elites clung to a system that kept them at the top. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 was the final spark. His victory, seen by many in the South as a death sentence for their way of life, led to a wave of secession that would plunge the country into chaos. The Civil War itself was a brutal, grinding conflict that left scars still visible today. Families were torn apart, cities burned, and the land itself became a battleground. Yet even as the Union emerged victorious, the questions that started the war were far from settled. The abolition of slavery was a monumental step, but the struggle for true equality was only beginning. In the years that followed, new battles would be fought, not just on fields, but in courtrooms, schools, and the streets of American cities. Today, the legacy of the Civil War is still fiercely debated. Statues and monuments spark protests, textbooks are rewritten, and the meaning of freedom and justice is argued in every corner of the country. Some say the wounds have never fully healed and that the ghosts of the past still haunt the present. As America moved into the industrial age and onto the world stage, the unresolved tensions of the Civil War would continue to shape its destiny. But what happened when the United States set its sights beyond its own borders and the world itself became the next battleground? The next chapter uncovers how America's rise to power brought new challenges and new controversies that still echo today. As the 20th century dawned, the United States was no longer just a collection of states recovering from civil war. It was a nation on the rise, hungry for influence and power on the global stage. The Spanish-American War marked a turning point. As America seized territories like Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, signaling to the world that a new player had arrived. But behind the headlines, there were whispers of backroom deals, secret promises, and a growing appetite for empire. Some critics argued that the war was less about liberation and more about expanding American reach, a debate that still lingers in the shadows of history. When World War I erupted, the U.S. at first tried to keep its distance. But as German submarines targeted American ships and rumors spread of secret plots to turn Mexico against its northern neighbor, the pressure to join the fight became impossible to ignore. The decision to enter the war wasn't just about defending democracy, it was also about securing American interests and shaping the post-war world. After the guns fell silent, the country enjoyed a brief period of prosperity, only to be rocked by the Great Depression, a crisis that exposed deep flaws in the nation's economic foundations and left millions struggling to survive. Then came World War II, a conflict that would transform the United States into a true superpower. The attack on Pearl Harbor shocked the nation, but it also united Americans in a way few events ever had. Factories roared to life, soldiers shipped out to distant fronts, and the government poured resources into secret projects like the Manhattan Project, which would unleash a force the world had never seen. The war ended with the U.S. not only victorious, but holding unprecedented power and a new set of responsibilities. But victory brought new dangers. The Cold War with the Soviet Union wasn't fought on traditional battlefields, but in the shadows, through espionage, propaganda, and proxy wars in places like Korea and Vietnam. The arms race led to stockpiles of nuclear weapons, and the fear of sudden annihilation hung over everyday life. Behind closed doors, intelligence agencies carried out covert operations, some of which remain classified to this day. The struggle wasn't just about ideology, it was about control, influence, and survival in a world where one wrong move could mean disaster. As the Cold War dragged on, the U.S. found itself entangled in conflicts and controversies that would shape its image for generations. And when the Soviet Union finally collapsed, many believed the era of uncertainty was over. But new challenges were already on the horizon, and the next chapter would test America's strength and resolve in ways no one could have predicted. With the Cold War's end, the United States stood alone as the world's undisputed superpower. But instead of a peaceful new era, the nation found itself facing a fresh wave of crises and controversies, some unfolding in the open, others hidden in the shadows. The 21st century began with a shock that would change everything: the September 11th attacks. In a matter of hours, the country's sense of security was shattered, and the world watched as the Twin Towers fell. The official story pointed to Al-Qaeda, but almost immediately, rumors and conspiracy theories began to swirl. Some questioned how such a coordinated attack could have happened under the watch of the world's most powerful intelligence agencies. Others speculated about what information might have been missed, or even withheld. The aftermath saw the U.S. launch wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, promising to root out terrorism and spread democracy. But as the years dragged on, the true costs became clear. Reports surfaced of secret prisons, controversial interrogation methods, and surveillance programs that reached far beyond what most Americans imagined. Whistleblowers like Edward Snowden would later reveal just how deeply the government was monitoring its own citizens, sparking fierce debates about privacy, security, and the limits of power. Meanwhile, the wars themselves became mired in controversy, with shifting justifications and mounting casualties. Critics questioned whether the real motives were about oil, influence, or unfinished business from decades past. At home, the country faced its worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. The 2008 financial meltdown wiped out savings, destroyed jobs, and left millions questioning the very foundations of the American dream. As Wall Street was bailed out and ordinary families struggled, anger and distrust simmered. Movements like Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party erupted, each blaming different culprits but united in their frustration with a system that seemed rigged against them. Even as the economy recovered, new challenges emerged. Debates over immigration, healthcare, and racial justice exposed deep divisions. Protests filled the streets, and social media amplified every controversy, rumor, and accusation. The rise of technology brought new opportunities and new threats. Concerns about election interference, data privacy, and the power of tech giants became front-page news. And through it all, the question lingered. Was America still the land of opportunity, or was it losing its way? As the nation faces an uncertain future, one thing is clear. The story of the United States is still being written, shaped by crisis, conflict, and the constant search for answers. But what lessons can be drawn from this turbulent journey, and what secrets might still be waiting to be uncovered? The final chapter invites you to look beyond the headlines and consider the deeper forces that have shaped and continue to shape America's destiny. Looking back across the centuries, it's clear that the story of the United States is anything but simple. From the earliest migrations shrouded in mystery, to the rise and fall of forgotten civilizations, to the relentless waves of colonization and revolution, America's past is a tapestry woven with ambition, conflict, and contradiction. Each era brought its own set of challenges and controversies, and each left behind questions that still spark debate today. The nation's greatest triumphs have often been shadowed by hidden motives and untold costs, while its darkest moments have sometimes given rise to unexpected resilience and change. What's most striking is how many of the country's defining moments remain open to interpretation. Was the push for independence truly about freedom, or were there deeper, less noble motives at play? Did the expansion westward represent destiny fulfilled, or was it a story of broken promises and lost cultures? Even the Civil War, often painted in black and white, reveals shades of gray when you dig beneath the surface. Layers of economic interest, political maneuvering, and personal ambition that complicate the familiar narrative. In the modern era, the questions have only grown more complex. The wars, crises, and technological revolutions of the last century have left Americans both more connected and more divided than ever before. Rumors, speculation, and controversy swirl around everything from foreign policy to the role of government in daily life. Whistleblowers, activists, and everyday citizens continue to challenge the official story, demanding transparency and accountability. And as new challenges emerge, from economic upheaval to global pandemics to the rise of artificial intelligence, the nation's future seems as uncertain and contested as its past. But perhaps that's what makes the story of the United States so compelling. It's a nation built on questions, on the restless search for meaning and identity, on the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The real history of America isn't just found in textbooks or monuments. It's alive in the debates, the discoveries, and the dreams of each new generation. So, as you reflect on the journey we've taken through the hidden chapters of America's past, ask yourself, how much of what you know is fact, and how much is still waiting to be uncovered? Because in the end, the most powerful stories are the ones that refuse to be finished. And America's story is far from over.